Okay, I don't want to hear anybody whine anymore about how bad Spider-Man 3 was. Okay? Because Amazing Spider-Man 2 is not any better. If you like it more than Spider-Man 3, that's fine, because there is a lot to like. But it's not better than Spider-Man 3. How to describe Amazing Spider-Man 2? Well, it's got a lot of good things. It's kind of a spaghetti of good things. You know, all these different threads, and each thread is very nice to mull over on its own, but it's still a mess. I'm going to echo what other people have said. There's just too much going on in this movie. I counted 6 plots. 6. Some of them are subplots, but I'm going to go into spoilers here. So, if you've seen the movie, good. If you've seen the movie, I guess you don't really need to hear me talk about it, unless you just want to hear me talk, which would be good. I'm going to talk. Okay. I just completely went off on a tangent in my head. It's kind of like what the movie does. It'll go off on some line of thought or another, some storyline, and then it'll just sort of hop to beginning a new one. It's like this movie has plot cancer, all right? It keeps growing new plot lines, and it shouldn't. Okay, like I said, spoilers. There's the Electro plot line, which is immediately obvious. Electro, the villain of the week. That's a plot line right there. There's the Gwen Stacy plot line. Peter dealing with his relationship with his girlfriend on and off again. Gwen Stacy. There's the Aunt May storyline. It's a subplot of Aunt May taking on extra jobs, trying to support herself. There's the Harry Osborn / Green Goblin story arc. There's the Peter's parents story arc, where Peter tries to investigate this conspiracy surrounding his parents. And finally, and this is a big spoiler, there's the Peter's grieving period story arc, which comes in at the very end. Now, just 2 of these plot lines could have made for a very full and fulfilling movie, but this movie keeps trying to have its cake and eat it too. Alright, so it begins with Peter stopping a truck hijacking and juggling these explosive containers, especially one that he carries around with him for a while, even though he could just web it up somewhere. He doesn't, but he's fighting Paul Giamatti as a maniacal Russian gangster. And it's so weird. I didn't realize it was Paul Giamatti at first, because he's completely over the top. That's another thing about this movie, which I'll elaborate on. Every once in a while, you get this these cartoonish characters, and you'd expect to see them in a Raimi film. Comparing the two, like I said, I prefer Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films. It's always been a source of great sorrow to me that the films weren't allowed to continue to a natural endpoint. But I will say that the recent line of Spider-Man films, the reboot by Mark Webb, do have somewhat more, it's set somewhat grounded more in reality, which makes it all the more jarring when we're introduced to these bizarre, over-the-top characters like Paul Giamatti's Rhino. Yeah, he's the Rhino. Again, spoilers. He's driving around town in this truck going, "Yeah, I crush you all! I crush you!" And Spider-Man zips down and he starts bantering with the guy, which I love because it's Spider-Man and that's what he does, though I can't help but think that fewer cars would have been crushed if Spidey had just reached in and punched the guy out with his spider strength and instead of tapping on the glass and going through this comedy routine with them. While the guy's driving through town, running over kittens and stuff, Spidey's doing his bit. So, like I said, time and a place, Spidey. But And you can get away with that in the comics because time has no meaning and you can get out reams of dialogue while a skyscraper is falling. Oh no, that structure is falling. We've got to figure out some way to support the structure. But how? Maybe if I lick my web line over here, my web line over here. But, in real life, it's just like 1, 2, the skyscraper's down. Anyway, getting back on track. Spidey's juggling these explosive containers. He gets very cartoony again, him zipping around grabbing these things, but it's great that they're exploring Spider-Man's flexible physicality. At one point, Spider-Man gets hit by a car, which is also funny, though I don't know why the cop driving this police cruiser doesn't stop the car when he realizes that Spider-Man is hanging onto the front bumper. I mean, most cops would. Does the guy just really have someplace to be? Oh man, I got Spider-Man on the bumper, but I just gotta keep going. There's no time to consider the consequences. He can take care of himself. He's Spider-Man. He'll probably zip off any second now. What the hell? Okay. And during all this, Peter starts seeing Gwen's dad's ghost. Yeah, seriously. I mean, I'd heard about that. I didn't think it would be quite so literal. How creepy would that be if you had a Dennis Leary ghost following you around? Can you imagine anything creepier? A Dennis Leary ghost? Well, that's what he does. The Dennis Leary ghost. So I don't blame Spidey for being caught off guard, but it does border a bit on psychosis. Because it's very literal, and it should not be that literal. Maybe they could have done that once or twice. But seriously, the Dennis Leary ghost pops up in the middle of fights and distracts Spidey. Batman doesn't hallucinate his parents that intensely. Speaking of Batman, Peter Parker in this movie, at the very beginning, he's a 3 times Batman. Alright? He's at his graduation. He's like, I wish Uncle Ben were here. I wish my parents were here. I wish Gwen's dad were here. Uncle Ben has really been marginalized in this series. He's basically an afterthought. I mean, originally, in the comics and in the old movies, Uncle Ben was the driving force, He was Peter's father figure. Now it's all about his actual parents who disappeared when he was a kid. And Uncle Ben, he's really been relegated. He's at the bottom of the list. And, oh yeah, and Uncle Ben died too. Oh well. It's a little weird. Just all of a sudden it's all about Peter's parents. And they were not that big a deal in the comics. So I imagine that they just created Peter's parents' angles to distance this line of movies from Sam Raimi's films, which hewed closer to the source material in some ways. Like I said, I think Andrew Garfield is a great Spider-Man, and he's portrayed brilliantly in this movie. One of the great things about Spider-Man is that he's an everyman superhero. He's all about the individual, about the little guy, There's this great scene where there's this little kid being bullied, and Spider-Man shows up and he chases those bullies off, and then he repairs the kid's science project with his webbing, which in the comics the webbing would disintegrate after a few hours, but I guess not in this version of the Spider-Man mythos. Permanent webbing, which means it's hanging all over New York, I guess, probably being sold on street corners as some kind of curative. But anyway, he helps out this little kid, and it's a really cute scene. It's like, hey, you made this? It's awesome. You're my best buddy. And this comes into play when he rescues a hapless schmo named Max Dillon. Is it Dillon? Yeah, Max Dillon. And you might tell I keep zipping back to the screen to look up the names because I'm terrible with names. But anyway, Jamie Foxx is Max Dillon. Jamie Foxx is great as Max Dillon. He's this sort of sad sack guy who's all alone. He's probably what I'll become someday. Maybe. Anyway, he's this guy, and he begins to idolize Spider-Man. In a kind of freaky way, yes, but he's also a very well-meaning sort of fellow. And he works at Oscorp, and all villainy in the Spider-Man's world now revolves around Oscorp, which is something I'm not necessarily averse to, because when you consolidate a comic book mythology into a single movie franchise, it makes sense to try and tie things together so that the villains, say, have a common origin. It makes it all seem a bit less coincidental. There's plenty of other wild coincidences, but I'll get into that. So anyway, this guy Max, he's inspired by Spider-Man, and it's his birthday, and nobody cares, and it's kind of sad, but he's just trying to get by, even though Oscorp stole his research because it's the consummate evil company. But there's an accident involving electric eels, because all of Spider-Man's enemies have to have animal themes, and that was the best they could do with Electro. Electro is a great villain. Max, he falls into a tank of electric eels, supercharged mutant electric eels, and he becomes Electro. And I have to say, it's really kind of sad, Electro, and not in the way you think, in a meta sense. But I'll get to that. While all this is happening, Peter's old friend, who we haven't heard about in the previous movie, but they're apparently best buddies, even though they haven't seen each other since they were little kids, and you would think that would have... it just seems a bit thin that they're still so close after all this time. But anyway, Peter's old friend Harry Osborn arrives to take over the reins of the company from Norman Osborn, his father, who has a rare disease that is turning him into a goblin-like creature as it kills him. Yeah, right. Anyway, on his deathbed, Harry's evil father, Norman Osborn, informs him that the disease is genetic, which really seems like the sort of thing that Harry should know by now. How could he not know? I mean, the kid's supposed to be smart, right? And on his deathbed, Harry's father's like, "I never told you the illness is genetic. Has your hand started shaking yet?" And Harry's hand has started shaking, so he's got the same thing. And for some reason, Harry starts dying really fast. Harry's whole quest in this film is to find a cure for this disease that's killing him, and he acts like he's on the clock. He's out of time. He's dying, which is weird because it took his father years and years to succumb to this thing. And his father's a much older man, and we see him on a cane, through videos. So he's been living with this for a while, so I don't know why Harry's all of a sudden just at death's door. But, he's got patches of skin turning green. So, yeah, that's a little artificial. Well, it's all artificial. Anyway, I keep zipping back to my list of grievances. I've constructed a list of pros and cons to this movie. Guess which side is larger? Yeah, the cons list, because I'm sadistic that way. Anyway, Peter and Harry tried to reconnect, and this is very well done. They do have good chemistry, and Andrew Garfield, he has this great New York accent. Like I said, he's really believable. He is the best Spider-Man I've seen on film. Again, nothing against Tobey Maguire. I love Tobey Maguire, would love to see more of him in the role, but Andrew Garfield's got a real gift for this. But like I said, apples and oranges. Anyway, Max Dillon's Electro manages to escape from a morgue because he'd been presumed dead, and Oscorp is trying to cover them up because they're evil, and they do evil things like that. And I was talking about the tragedy of Electro. Here's what I mean. Max Dillon is a highly sympathetic character, and what makes him so tragic is that people forget about him. They just sort of stop paying attention to him. He's one of those guys that everybody walks all over. And we forget about him. In the movie, once he becomes Electro, he stops being a character. His character arc stops. We don't get a resolution to that. Not really. It's just, he becomes Electro, and Spider-Man shows up. He makes a fuss in Times Square. He starts absorbing all the electricity without meaning to, causing trouble. And he notices he's up on the big screens, and then Spider-Man's on the screen. And he forms this hatred of Spider-Man. And I don't think it's quite adequately explained. But that's a thing in this movie. All the villains, for some reason, fixate on Spider-Man. Harry does this too later. It's like they just see him as a target all of a sudden, like he's the cause of all their problems. And I'm not sure that it's quite obvious why that's happening. Max Dillon Electro, he stops being believable when he becomes Electro because I just can't penetrate his motivations quite so well. Maybe it was more believable to other people. Max Dillon's character, Electro, does retain some quirks, some neuroses, some signs of his feelings of inadequacy all through his identity as Electro, but like I said, it's never carried through. It just lose track of Max Dillon and all the Sturm und Drang. I love that term, Sturm und Drang. We should use that term more often. But we lose track of Max Dillon and all the special effects surrounding Electro, which I think that's kind of sad. Sturm und Drang. Isn't that great? Sturm und Drang. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I know what it means, but I don't know the direct translation. Is it German? Don't tell me. I think I did know, but I forgot. Anyway, we're talking about Electro. Jamie Foxx's Electro shows up Times Square, starts doing all this crazy stuff, and it's a great sequence. Spider-Man showing up, trying to talk him down. He fights Electro, takes him down with the help of some firemen. It's a great sequence. It's a lot of fun. That's what I came to see. You know, Spider-Man saving the day, throwing quips, connecting with the people of New York City. It's great. I was a little surprised that he actually managed to defeat Electro that first time, because the usual pattern of these things is that a new supervillain shows up and sort of trounces the hero, or it ends in a tie, setting up the villain as a formidable menace. But no, Spidey defeats him right away, which is fine. You know, I don't mind switching things up a bit. And Electro is taken to prison, which is somehow also a research institute run by Oscorp, where they're doing these hideous, inhumane experiments. Anyway, all during this, Harry Osborn attempts to take control of his father's company because his father dies. I'll believe it when I see a body. But anyway, Harry is trying to find a cure for his condition. He stumbles upon some crazy research files hidden by his father, while Peter is searching for clues to the mystery of his own parents. That reminds me, I completely skipped over the prologue of this movie, where Peter's parents are flying away on a plane, and Peter's dad has to wrestle with an assassin in the plane while he's trying to send off a coded message. That was neat. That's all I have to say about it. It was touching. But anyway, he sends this message, Roosevelt won, which is, I don't know, I was expecting an information package, but apparently it's just the term Roosevelt won. Peter manages to find subway tokens hidden in a calculator, and they lead him to a... Anyway, Harry Osborn finds out that it's possible that there may be a cure for his condition in Spider-Man's blood, because Spider carries with him the venom from these genetically engineered spiders, because apparently spiders have a healing factor, so he tries to get Spider-Man to give him his blood, and he tries bribing him. He's like, what do you want? What do you want? And I'm like, well, maybe he wants a spider cave or something, which he gets later. Spidey actually gets a spider cave. But anyway, Spider-Man turns him down because he can't give him his blood because it might turn him into a monster. Somehow. Anyway, Spider-Man zips off, and Harry swears vengeance. You're a fraud, Spider-Man! And because he's on the clock, like I said. Yeah, there's a time motif in this movie, which is kind of interesting. It starts with the close-up of a clock and ends with the clock, and time will slow down and speed up. I don't quite know what they were doing with that, but it's kind of neat. And all during this, Peter's trying to mend fences with Gwen Stacy, who's trying to deal with him, always zipping off and being torn between his responsibilities as Spider-Man and as a loyal boyfriend to her, and she's got a scholarship program that she wants to get into so that she can go to London, because she thinks that would be a really good move for her, but she needs to solidify her relationship with Peter Parker before then. Meanwhile, at the Ravencroft Institute, Electro is being subjected to brutal experiments while Harry searches for a cure. You see what I mean about this movie? It's a mile a minute. There's no empty space. Meanwhile, at the Ravencroft Institute, and you remember what I said about cartoonish characters? Electro is put in this specially built prison cell with water. He's dunked into water, and he doesn't drown, I guess, because he doesn't need to breathe anymore. And there's this ludicrously outlandish character, Dr. Kafka, who's the mad scientist who's been charged by Oscorp with experimenting on Electro. It's just so weird, because you think that this guy's kidding. You think that he's just a prison guard who decided to mess with the prisoner by putting on a lab coat and pretending that he's like some Nazi doctor or something, but he's not. This guy is actually... he comes up and like, "Ah, Herr Electro, it is so good to see you, yeah? I am Dr. Kafka. Today we will be experimenting with your pain thresholds. I am, how you say, an artist. When it comes to the infliction of pain, we will begin now, yeah?" What is this guy? Where did he come from? He's totally out of place. Like I said, you could get away with this in a Sam Raimi film, because Sam Raimi does over the top really well. But in this movie, this guy he's a caricature of a supervillain. But he taunts Electro, and of course, eventually Electro's going to escape, and he does escape when Harry is ousted from his own company by the corrupt executives who sort of slipped the rug out from under him. And at this point, Harry's desperate. He's discovered a hidden research cache which may be able to help him, including the Green Goblin suit, which he will be able to operate because he'll be the Green Goblin, so he'll know how to operate it. And it has a self-healing factor in it somehow. But he needs to get in there, so he slips. So he goes to the jail, and they just let him in. And somehow Harry is able to single-handedly overpower 2 trained prison guards. Yeah, up to this point he seemed really frail and weak. You know, he's this 20-year-old who can barely get by, but he whips off one guy's taser and he's doing these moves and like, I got you, and then he takes the security card and he's slipping in his disguise as a doctor. Did he take a self-defense course or something? But he frees Electro to help him, and the actor who plays Harry Osborn, Dane DeHaan, he really sells the part. His desperation is palpable. So he did a great job, Dane DeHaan. Again, it's a very different Harry Osborn from the one in the last movies. I should stop comparing the two. I really should. But he's screaming at Electro, I need you! And Electro's like, you need me? There's, again, hints of Max Dillon's character still in there. I think we could have gone farther with that. But so Electro escapes, he disintegrates himself out of his harness and reintegrates himself somewhere else like Dr. Manhattan, though I'm a little confused how he's able to do that to his clothes and the gadgets that are attached to him, but he does. He disintegrates and teleports somewhere else, and he's got his boxer shorts on. Okay, and then they invade the Oscorp building, and Electro has his own costume. He's got a full bodysuit. I don't know where they could have possibly gotten that from. It even has little lightning bolts on the side. Seriously, did they stop by a tailor or something, tell them that this supervillain needs a costume? And yes, again, Electro can teleport. He can move in and out of light sockets and reintegrate all the metal bits and the plastic and the suit that he's wearing. But meanwhile, again, there's lots of meanwhiles in this movie. Lots of meanwhiles. Meanwhile, Peter has managed to put together the meaning of the message Roosevelt. Apparently, it is in reference to a secret underground subway terminal. I don't know how secret it can be since he learns about this on the internet, but that's how it's described, a secret underground subway terminal with pictures and everything that apparently was once used by President Roosevelt. So Peter goes down there to what I'm calling his spider cave now, and he puts in a subway token, and the subway line opens up, and a subway car rises up from the ground. How did Peter's father put this together? Who did he hire to install all this? How did he get access to President Roosevelt's old secret subway car? What is going on here? Anyway, though, in the car he finds research equipment he finds a recorded message on an old computer from his father, a message from the grave. You know how it goes. A loved one leaves a message, a heartfelt message explaining himself, and it inspires the hero. We'll come back to that later. Meanwhile, Harry makes his way down to the evil weapons cache, where Oscorp keeps all its supervillain projects, and he injects himself with Spider-Villain. But unbeknownst to him, but beknownst to us, because we saw Peter's dad's message, it is keyed to Parker DNA, so it won't work on him properly. And what it does is it mutates him into the new Green Goblin. And it's really stupid, I gotta say. The new Green Goblin, he just looks stupid. I mean, come on. He's got green teeth and his hair is all weird. How does mutating affect your hair? Seriously, hair is dead. If you mutate, how do you get a new hairdo? He's got clown hair. But anyway, then he crawls to the glider suit, the Green Goblin suit, which has its own healing factor. Everything's healing factors in this movie. And he starts cackling maniacally as he sets off to confront Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Electro takes control of the power grid as, meanwhile, Peter reconciles with Gwen Stacy and decides to go off to England with her. And Peter swoops down to confront Electro in the power station. Meanwhile. The final battle between Spider-Man and Electro is predictably awesome and awe-inspiring. Gwen Stacy shows up in a cop car, and everything's very neatly aligned at this power station. Peter decides that he can use her. He needs her to get to this button that's in the central control station at the power station, which is it's got this great big window directly across from where Peter's got his final shot at Electro, and apparently webbing can conduct electricity because he ties all his webbing together, and he yells to Gwen, do it now, while Electro's blasting his webbing, and somehow Gwen can hear him over all this. I don't think I would have been able to hear him if I was in a room through glass across from which all this noise was happening, but she does. She hears him. For all that hubbub, she presses the button, and the electricity feeds back through the webbing and starts overcharging Electro, because apparently he can be overcharged. Okay, you say so, because he's like a battery? Really? He's a battery. If you want to describe him that way, sure, whatever. There's got to be some crazy MacGyver gimmick to defeat the villain. That's par for the course. You couldn't just talk him down or something. That's the end of Electro, and again, I think that he could have used a better resolution. Just something to bring it all together. And then Harry Osborn swoops in as the Green Goblin. Harry Osborn swoops in as the Green Goblin because everyone fixates on Spider-Man. Now, I don't know why they fixate on Spider-Man. Both Max Dillon and Harry Osborn have a lot more enemies than this. Okay, there are plenty of people at Oscorp who treated them worse than Spider-Man, but there's this message in the movie that Spider-Man represents hope, so I guess they're targeting him because they represent people whose hope has been dashed or something. But anyway, now Harry Osborn is this maniacal supervillain, the Green Goblin, and the Green Goblin, he deserved more, okay? You can't just throw a definitive supervillain in at the very end of a movie for one climactic battle, because there's been no build-up between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin as they are. Okay? They just came out of nowhere. They didn't have time to take each other's measure. You've got to have more than one battle. They reduced the Green Goblin to just this one fight. And it seems stunted because there's no build-up. There's no arc for the villain as the villain. He just becomes the Green Goblin. And all of a sudden, he's the Green Goblin. And there's no epic back and forth between the two as they struggle for control of the city or something like that. No, he just arrives to beat up Spider-Man just this one time. So he falls into the clock tower where this time motif, time slows down, speeds up at various points in this film. And it's kind of neat. I can see what they're going for, though they don't really make it clear. But if you've read the comics, you know where this is going. Gwen Stacy, she's falling through the clock tower. Peter manages to incapacitate the Green Goblin. He shoots a web line out, and the web line forms a hand, which is nowhere near as poetic or elegant as the filmmakers apparently thought it would be. it just looks silly. This little spitball forming a hand which reaches out for Gwen Stacy. And like I said, if you're familiar with the character's history, you know where this is going. He catches her, but it's too late. Her spine is snapped. And Peter, he's down there, and Andrew Garfield sells the part. It's very touching, very moving, just hideously tragic. You know, they just managed to patch up their relationship. He was going to England with her. She had her whole life ahead of her. Oh. And it's just too bad. I mean, I was hoping that it wouldn't happen. I mean, part of me was kind of hoping that it would happen because that's how it goes. But then again, it's a great tragedy. But then again, but it happens, and you're like, oh no, Gwen Stacy died. Oh. So now Peter is 4 times Batman. I wish Uncle Ben were here. I wish my parents were here. I wish Gwen's dad were here. I wish Gwen were here. A recurring theme in this movie seems to be how people deal with loss. Peter comes to terms with his parents over the course of the film, and Harry, in the mirror of that, achieves a kind of reconciliation with his own father, his evil goblin father, as they sort of spit in each other's eyes as they part on his deathbed. But this is just... what does it in for me, what innervates this whole thing, would you like to know how Peter reconciles Gwen Stacy's death? How he gets over it? He watches a video of her talking. Just like he did with his father earlier in the movie. They do the video from Beyond the Grave thing twice. You can't do that. You cannot do that twice in the same movie. He watches his father bid him farewell through a video, and then he watches Gwen do the same thing, because she gives a speech at their high school graduation in the beginning of the movie. It's recorded. He watches the speech. I guess maybe he hadn't watched it before then. Maybe he had. I don't know, because he wasn't there. He was busy being Spider-Man. But she happens to say just what he needs to hear. She gives this inspiring speech about how we must move on with our lives. We're not immortals. And oh, they did it twice. That's just comical. You don't... You could make a whole movie about the grieving process, all right? If, as anyone who's lost a loved one can tell you, I'm sure it is a journey in its own right. You don't do it twice. He sees video recordings from departed loved ones who inspire him to move on with his life twice in this movie. Twice! Someone sat down and wrote this script and decided that Gwen Stacy would speak to Peter from beyond the grave just like his father spoke to him from beyond the grave. Were they trying to tell us something here? What was the message with that? You don't do that twice, okay? That's meant to be a clever and poetic device in the story to help the hero move on from some personal stumbling block. You don't do it twice! They did it twice. They did the fond farewell through a video recording thing twice. And in the movie's final 15 minutes, they montage 5 months away. Seriously, 5 months. We go through the seasons, Peter's staring at her grave. 5 months. You don't do this, okay? If a hero's girlfriend dies, he deals with it over the course of the next movie or something. You don't just fit all of that into a montage at the end of the same movie. Unless you do it well. This movie does not do it quite well enough. He has a talk with Aunt May, who encourages him to set his heartbreak aside and move on with life. And coincidentally, this happens just as Harry Osborn arranges with his mysterious benefactor to start throwing supervillains back on the street. Yeah, Paul Giamatti shows up again as the Rhino in this great big rhino suit. He's doing his shtick. I'm the Rhino! I'll crush you all! And it sure is a nice coincidence that Peter managed to get over his ennui just then, because there's this dumb cliche scene. You remember the little kid from earlier whose science project Peter saved? Well, they couldn't leave well enough alone. No, they have to bring that kid back. He's in a Spider-Man outfit. He climbs over the railing. There are all these people watching, even though the rhino's stomping about. I would have gotten out of there because the guy's got freaking Gatling guns. But the little kid wanders out in his Spider-Man costume. Oh, no, that's too much. It was too much. That's too much. Nobody stops the kid. No, everybody's like, oh, no, get that kid. No, don't get the kid. Oh, someone save my baby. Oh, no, we can't. And there's a little kid having a Mexican showdown with the Rhino. Nobody dashed out there to grab the kid? Seriously. I'd like to say that the kid's being brave, but come on. What was he going to do? Okay, never mind. Spider-Man shows up. It's like, thanks for filling in for me, kid. Yeah, encourage that kind of behavior, why don't you? But no, it's great. Spider-Man shows up, and he confronts the Rhino, and that's his triumphant return. They shouldn't have tried to smoosh all this in to the very end of the movie. But he confronts the Rhino, and the heroic music blares, and for the record, the hero music in this movie is so blunt force. It sounds like a space shuttle should be taking off or something. But anyway, that's Spider-Man 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2, and the end credits even give me reason to complain. You know why? Well, for one thing, they start off with the stupid wireframes and close-ups of gadgets. Oh, that has been done to death. Seriously. Can we not have any more movies that end with a montage, with a section of close-ups of zooming in on CG models of the gadgets and the wireframes and things? It's so generic. It's so generic at this point. No more movies ending with close-ups and zoom-ins and illustrations of gadgets and wireframes. Just no more. None of that. Okay? It's done. It's done. It was cool when they did it with Iron Man 1. And then there's the after credits scene. Oh, wow. Well, we all wait for that, right? Every Marvel movie has to have an after credits scene. It's a scene from X-Men Days of Future Past. What the hell? They advertise another movie? It's not even in the same continuity. What were they thinking? That's not... But you know what? I'm very satisfied. This is good. Yeah, I love it. I mean, I tried not to give in to my evil impulses, but I'm going to do it now. Like, well done, Amazing Spider-Man 2. You actually made Spider-Man 3 not the bottom of the barrel anymore, okay? I know, maybe that's cruel, maybe it's not that bad, but that's part of the problem, because this movie, it had good elements. There were parts of it that were good. But it's a mess. 54% on Rotten Tomatoes. You know what Spider-Man 3 got? 65%. How do you like them apples? One of these days I'm going to get off this merry-go-round. But Andrew Garfield does make a great Spider-Man.